And now for part C. So now they define y as a different, equals g of x as a particular solution of this equation. That initial condition, g of -1 is 2, and it wants us to calculate this limit. So the first thing you're going to do when you look at that limit is, maybe this is bad advice, but it's probably going to be L'Hopital's. But don't just jump into it thinking that it's going to be L'Hopital's. That's the good advice. It has to be 0 over 0 or infinity over infinity for that to be. So we're going to do direct substitution first, which would be g of -1 minus 2 over 3 times -1 plus 1, which is 0 squared. So that's what you get when you do direct substitution with a limit. You have 0 on the bottom, which typically means it's a vertical asymptote, except if the top is 0. So g of -1 is 2. So we have 2 minus 2 over 0, which is 0 over 0, which means L'Hopital's rule applies. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I want to make one comment before we move on. I didn't mean to do that. If you do this on the AP exam, if you see this limit and you put equals 0 over 0, you're going to lose a point. I know that for a fact. The limit does not equal 0 over 0. It's really, I guess, the form is 0 over 0. So don't put equals 0 over 0. I think that's nitpicking, but I know they won't accept that. But you can do this. This limit, and probably you should do this, because it's 0 over 0 and L'Hopital's rule applies, this limit equals this limit. If you take the derivative of the top and the bottom, that's what L'Hopital's rule says to do. G prime of x over, this is a chain rule, 6 times x plus 1. That's fine. Now we're going to plug in -1 to see what happens. So again, be careful. Don't just put equals and then put the -1. Let's just evaluate it. So off to the side, g prime of -1 over 0. So it looks like we may have a vertical asymptote again. So if this were undefined, the original limit would be, but let's just see what g prime of -1 is. Well, since y is g prime of x, then the derivative of g of x is right here. So we're going to plug in -1 comma 2 into this derivative. So x is -1 minus y is 2. And you can see that is 0. So this limit is 0 over 0 again, which means right here, this limit is still equal to the limit as x goes to -1 of, let's take the derivative of again, g double prime of x, second derivative, over the derivative of the bottom, which is 6. So now we're going to be able to come up with a conclusion to this limit, no doubt about it. All we need to do is figure out what g double prime of at -1 is, but here we go. We need the second derivative. We already calculated that from the first problem, actually right here. So I'm going to copy this over. So I need to figure out what g double prime of -1 is. And 2 goes with -1. So we have 2 times -1 minus 1/2 times a -1 minus 1/2 times 2. All this should be in parentheses. I missed that. That's negative 1 squared, right? Be careful here. So this is negative 2 minus 1/2 times 1 minus 1 again, which wasn't surprising. This is just negative 2. So, scroll back up here. This is, because direct substitution is going to work, I can say this is the derivative at negative 1 comma 2 over 6, which we just said was negative 3. Or if you want, I'm sorry, we said it was negative 2. So negative 1/3. Or just leave it as negative 2 over 6. I would probably would recommend that anyhow, but that's it.